For 33 years, a woman sat chained in the dark beneath a Moscow convent. She was forbidden a candle. She was forbidden a name. She was forbidden a single visitor. The Russian state had erased her so completely that the nuns who fed her through a slot in the wall were threatened with dismissal. She had once been the wealthiest woman in Moscow. She had been the cousin of Tsars. She had killed 138 people across 7 years and walked free for every single one of them. Then Catherine the Great took the throne, and Catherine decided that some monsters do not deserve death. They deserve to be forgotten while still breathing. This is not a story about a forgotten killer. This is the story of how Imperial Russia spent 22 official complaints and 7 years protecting her. It is the story of an empress who arrived from Prussia at the age of 33 with no Russian blood, no legal claim, and a single political question to answer. Could Russian law touch a noble woman? Catherine picked one case. She picked the worst one. The dark cell was the answer. Before we step into the cell where one of Russia's worst killers ended her years and meet the empress from Prussia who buried her there, drop a comment with your city and country. Hit subscribe and join Velours Spectre. You are watching Velours Spectre, where the past does not stay buried. To understand how one woman could end 138 lives without a single legal consequence for 7 years, you must understand the machine that owned 18th century Russia. Imperial Russia in 1755 ran on serfdom, a system of inherited human ownership that the European Enlightenment had already begun to condemn, but that Russian nobles defended with theological certainty. A noble Russian household of any consequence operated less like a family and more like a private duchy. The master held legal jurisdiction over the lives, marriages, and bodies of every serf inside his property line. He could not legally murder them. In practice, the legal protection existed on paper and almost nowhere else. Daria Nikolaevna Saltykova entered this world in March of 1730. Her family, the Ivanovs, were minor gentry. Her marriage in 1749 to Gleb Saltykov elevated her into one of the most powerful clans in the empire. The Saltykovs were cousins to the Romanov throne. They sat on the Senate. They controlled regional governorships. They were, in the language of the 18th century court, untouchable. When Gleb died in 1755, his 25-year-old widow inherited Troitsko, a sprawling estate outside Moscow with 600 human beings attached to it as inventory. She also inherited the protection that came with the family name. The Russian Senate received its first formal complaint about Saltykova's treatment of her serfs in 1757. The complainant, a manservant, whose wife had not returned from the master's chambers, was flogged for false witness against his betters. He was returned to Troitsko in chains. He vanished within the month. 21 further complaints would follow over the next 5 years. The Senate processed each one. The Senate dismissed each one. The accusers were punished. The accused was protected. The machinery functioned exactly as it was designed to function. It functioned that way until June of 1762. Saltykova at 25 was, by every contemporary account, beautiful, devout, and unremarkable. Senate records describe her in passing as a pious widow, with a calm hand for estate management. She made regular donations to 2 Moscow monasteries. She attended liturgy 3 times per week. She kept icons in every room of the manor house. Her sons, Theodore and Nicholas, were 5 and 4 when their father died. She raised them as a single mother in a culture that gave young widows almost nothing to do except disappear into religious observance or remarry quickly. She did neither. She inherited her husband's full property rights, his Senate connections, and critically a household of 600 souls, whose legal status placed them somewhere between cattle and furniture. She managed the estate herself. She refused suitors. She corresponded directly with the Senate on grain quotas and tax obligations. The other Moscow nobles found her formidable. None of them found her dangerous. The empress who would eventually end her remained at this point a forgotten teenager in a German backwater. Sophie Auguste Friederike of Anhalt-Zerbst was 14 years old. When Saltykova married into the Romanov orbit, Sophie would not become Catherine for another 15 years. She would not become Empress for another 20. The two women would never meet. They would never exchange a single letter. And yet one of them would spend 33 years deciding what the other was permitted to be remembered as. In late 1756, Saltykova fell in love. His name was Nikolai Andreevich Tuachev. He was a land surveyor working a commission near her estate, a man of minor noble birth and considerable charm, whose grandson would one day become Russia's greatest lyric poet. Too low in rank to marry a Saltykov, too useful for her to ignore. She brought him into her household. She offered him gifts, access, and her bed. He accepted all three for almost a year. In the autumn of 1757, Tuachev fell in love with another woman. Her name was Pelagia. She was younger, prettier, and within Tuachev's permitted social register. He proposed to Pelagia in secret. He planned to leave Saltykova quietly. Saltykova discovered the plan in November. What happened in her mind during the following weeks was never recorded. What happened in her household was, according to the 1768 trial transcripts, the first servant to die at Saltykova's hands was a young chambermaid who had been responsible for washing Tuachev's linens. Saltykova accused her of stealing a hair ribbon. She kept the girl in a locked room for 2 days. She supervised the punishment personally. The chambermaid did not survive it. There was no investigation. The body was buried in unconsecrated ground at the edge of the estate. The local priest was paid. The household understood the new arithmetic. Anything connected to Tuachev, however distantly, however absurdly, would not survive contact with the mistress. It was a message. Tuachev fled the estate in early 1758 and married Pelagia in haste. He survived. His wife survived. The two of them spent the rest of their lives quietly raising children and avoiding Moscow. Saltykova never recovered. Or perhaps she did. Perhaps this was who she had always been. The question would never matter to the women who would die for it. Picture this scene. It is the winter of 1759. Snow has buried Troitsko to the windows. The household runs on the rhythms of an isolated rural estate. Bread baked at dawn, livestock fed at midday. Saltykova has by now ended at least 11 lives on the recorded register. The pattern of her violence has settled into a routine that the surviving serfs understand with the clarity of survival. A young washerwoman is summoned to the mistress's chambers because a sleeve cuff has been stitched poorly. She does not return. 3 days later, a stable boy is sent to dig in the frozen ground at the back orchard. He does not speak about what he buries. He does not need to. Everyone in the household knows the procedure now. The procedure has become infrastructure. The first formal complaint against Saltykova was filed in 1757 by a relative of one of the early victims. The petitioner traveled to Moscow on foot, slept 3 nights outside the Senate building, and presented his case to a clerk who recorded the complaint, accepted a small fee, and filed it. The petitioner returned home. Within 2 weeks, Saltykova's lawyer had arrived at Troitsko with a Senate writ. The petitioner was arrested for slander against a noblewoman. He was sentenced to a public flogging and lifetime exile to a Siberian work camp. 21 more complaints would follow that one. 21 more lives ruined for the act of telling the truth. The Senate did not investigate. The Senate did not intervene. The Senate did not ask any of the obvious questions. Why were so many servant girls disappearing from a single estate? Why were the complaints all so identical? Why did the same noblewoman keep appearing in every report? The system had been designed to protect women like Saltykova. It was performing perfectly. By 1761, Saltykova's pattern had become so entrenched that the village around Troitsko had developed its own euphemism for it. Servants did not say a girl had been killed. They said she had been sent to the orchard. The orchard at the back of the estate had become a small cemetery. Modern scholarship, including Madariaga, Montefiore, and several Russian-language sources, agrees on the broad outline of what was happening there. Saltykova would identify a target. The pretext could be anything: a poorly washed shirt, a spot on a floor, a look that lasted half a second too long. The target would be brought to a workroom in the manor house. The doors would be locked. The mistress would supervise the punishment personally. The duration could be hours. The punishments grew progressively more brutal as the years passed. The victim almost never survived. The bodies were buried at night by trusted male servants who understood that their own lives depended on their silence. The local priest performed unofficial graveside rites in exchange for a small annual stipend. In 1762, 2 more complaints reached Moscow. Both came from villagers whose daughters had vanished into Troitsko and never come back. Both followed the established arc. Both petitioners were charged with slander. Both were exiled. But something had shifted in the capital. On June 28th of that year, a 33-year-old German princess named Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst overthrew her own husband Tsar Peter III in a near-bloodless palace coup. She took the regnal name Catherine. She declared herself sole sovereign of all the Russias. Within weeks, Peter would be dead in suspicious circumstances at a remote estate. Within a year, Catherine would be unchallenged empress. She inherited a country that had been ruled for the previous half-century by capricious and increasingly erratic Romanovs. She inherited an aristocracy that had become so accustomed to legal immunity that they had stopped pretending to disguise their cruelty. She inherited a peasant population that was already simmering toward the great revolts that would erupt under Pugachev a decade later. Catherine understood, with the intelligence that would define her reign, that something had to be visibly changed. She could not abolish serfdom. The nobility would have killed her within a season. She could not reform the Senate. The same nobility controlled it. What she could do was pick a single case so obscene, so well documented, and so impossible to defend that even the Senate could not protect the accused. A petition arrived on her desk in the autumn of 1762. It came from a serf whose 3 wives had all died in successive years at Troitsko. He had walked to St. Petersburg in winter to present his case directly to the new empress. He had been arrested twice along the way. He had been flogged once. He had not stopped walking. Catherine read the petition. She ordered a full investigation. She assigned a senior Senate official to manage the case personally. She informed the Saltykov family that their cousin's protection had ended. It was, in the cold calculus of statecraft, an inspired choice. Saltykova had killed too many to defend. Her crimes were too unambiguous to spin. Her family was powerful enough that punishing her would send a clear signal, but not powerful enough to retaliate against the throne. Catherine had found her first piece of leverage. The investigation began in early 1763. Stand inside the investigation office at the Senate building in Moscow for a moment. It is March of 1764. The senior Senate investigator Catherine had personally assigned to the Saltykova case has been working the file for 15 months. He has interviewed 72 surviving servants from the Troitsko estate. He has exhumed 26 bodies from the orchard. He has located 8 escaped serfs who had fled the estate and survived in the Moscow underclass for years afterward. He has cross-referenced the household ledgers, the local parish death registry, the unofficial grave diggers, and the Senate's own dismissed complaints archive. The picture that emerges from his investigation is, in the language of his final report, beyond any human explanation. The investigator refused to speculate on motive. He believed that was for theologians. His job was to document what could be documented. He documented 138 names. Catherine reviewed the report personally. The trial was conducted in closed Senate session over the course of 4 years. The Saltykov family attempted, through every available channel, to have the case dismissed or moved to a tribunal of nobles. Catherine refused at every turn. The empress understood the symbolic weight of what she was building. The trial would not be reformatted into a noble's private affair. The serf petitioners would be heard. The bodies in the orchard would be named in court. The Senate would issue a public verdict. The verdict was issued on the 2nd of October in 1768. Imagine the scene at Red Square that morning. October. Cold rain. A wooden platform had been erected at the center of the square. the same square where Russian Tsars had crowned themselves for 2 centuries. A crowd of several thousand had gathered, including foreign ambassadors who had been specifically invited by the throne to witness the proceedings. The point of the ceremony was that it had been witnessed. Saltykova was brought out in chains. She was 38 years old. Her hair had not yet grayed. Her face, according to the diplomatic dispatches sent home that week, registered nothing, neither defiance nor remorse nor fear. She had spent 6 years insisting on her innocence and her family connections. She did not stop insisting on either now. A herald read the sentence. The herald read each of the 138 names, the ones the investigator had been able to identify, out loud, slowly, to the square. It took most of an hour. Saltykova was chained to the platform throughout. A wooden board was hung around her neck. It read, in plain Cyrillic letters that any literate observer in the square could read, "This woman tortured and killed." After the hour was complete, she was led from the platform to a closed carriage. The carriage drove her under armed Senate escort to the Ivanovsky convent in central Moscow. The cell had been prepared months in advance to Catherine's specifications. It was small. It was located in the foundations of the convent, below the chapel, below even the storerooms. It received no daylight. It was reached through a single iron door that opened into a stone corridor that opened only when food was delivered. The food was delivered through a small hatch. Saltykova was chained to the wall by her left ankle. The chain was long enough to permit her to reach the food hatch and a small drainage hole. It was not long enough to permit her to stand fully upright. Catherine had personally ordered that Saltykova was never to be addressed by name. She was never to be permitted any visitors. She was never to receive any correspondence. The monastery sisters who delivered her food were instructed to speak no word to her ever, under threat of dismissal. Her own family, the powerful Saltykov clan that had protected her for 7 years of killing, was forbidden to acknowledge her existence in any official document. She would be erased while still alive. She would breathe for 33 more years inside that erasure. She died in the cell on the 9th of December in 1801. She was 71 years old. The monastery sisters who found the body recorded the event in their internal register with 3 words: "The prisoner perished." The Saltykov family did not protest the verdict publicly. They stripped Darya's name from family chronicles. Her 2 sons inherited what remained of her estate after Senate confiscations. Theodore married into a respectable household and lived an unremarkable life. Nicholas joined the imperial military and died young. The Troitsko estate was sold by 1772. The orchard was plowed under within a generation. 600 serfs were redistributed to other landlords. The villages around Troitsko rebuilt themselves in the slow manner of Russian provincial life and did not speak of the years between 1757 and 1762 in any official record. Catherine's reign continued for another 33 years. She would conquer Crimea. She would correspond with Voltaire. She would oversee the partitions of Poland. She would die in 1796. 5 years before the woman she had buried alive in the dark cell finally stopped breathing. The cell outlasted the Empress by half a decade. 2 centuries before Michel Foucault published his great study of how power organizes punishment, how modern regimes moved away from spectacle and toward erasure, Catherine the Great had already built the model. Foucault argued that hidden confinement disciplines a society in ways that public execution never could. Catherine understood this 2 centuries early. The lesson is not new. The Romans had their carceries, the Athenians their hemlock. Every regime in human history that has survived its own contradictions has built a private space out of sight, out of name, where the powerful disappear when they have become too inconvenient to defend. The cell at Ivanovsky was simply one of the most elegant solutions in the history of statecraft. Tourists walk across Red Square every day. None of them stop on the spot where the platform stood. The cell beneath the convent has been sealed for 2 centuries. The 138 names buried in the orchard at Troitsko are still unwritten anywhere. The wood does not remember. The dark does not need to. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If this story revealed something about how power has always built quiet rooms for its monsters and how rarely those rooms produce justice for the named dead, subscribe, hit the like button, and share with someone who deserves to remember the women who were never counted. You have just watched another premium documentary from Velours Spectre. Click the video appearing on your screen right now. The descent into the past continues.